The dusty market hummed with voices, all speaking over one another in a chaotic chorus. Merchants displayed exotic goods, shimmering crystals, and strange alien artifacts. In the midst of the bustling crowd, a peculiar sight drew everyone's attention. A tall, silver-skinned alien woman standing alone on a raised platform. Her emerald eyes scanned the faces below, and though her posture was calm, her fingers gripped her worn cloak tightly. Valeth had no choice but to be here. Her child, Nira, was everything to her. The young girl's fragile health had worsened, and the medicine she needed could only be found on distant planets. Valeth knew she couldn't afford the cost. Every attempt to earn the money had failed. When the idea of putting herself up for auction first crossed her mind, she had dismissed it as unthinkable. But with Nira's condition deteriorating, she had made the heartbreaking decision. Now, as the alien auctioneer raised his voice, listing Valeth's attributes to the crowd, she kept her gaze fixed on the little figure standing at the edge of the market. Nira's dark, round eyes peeked out from behind a vendor's cart, her small frame trembling as she watched her mother. Valeth's heart ached, but she stood tall. She had to be strong. The auction began. Several beings of various species stepped forward, some tapping on handheld devices, others muttering to their companions. They weren't looking for a servant. They were looking for something far more unusual. Valeth's race, the Xilari, was nearly extinct, their homeworld long gone. Some bidders saw her as a rare curiosity. Others seemed intrigued by her calm demeanor and proud stature. In the midst of the crowd, a human man leaned against a rusted metal post, watching the scene with quiet interest. Captain Daniel Rourke had seen many strange things during his years of trading and exploring. He had seen desperate people and dangerous deals, but something about this moment felt different. He had wandered into the market looking for spare ship parts, not expecting to find himself in the middle of an alien auction. Daniel's gaze shifted to the young alien girl hiding in the shadows. He noticed how her eyes never left Valeth. It was clear that this wasn't an ordinary sale. There was more to this story. The bidding grew louder, more aggressive. A wealthy-looking alien in a silk-like robe raised the price again. The auctioneer's voice cracked as he announced the new bid. Valeth stood still, her face unreadable, but her hands clutched her cloak even tighter. Daniel didn't understand why, but something inside him stirred. He stepped forward, raising his hand. The crowd quieted. The auctioneer squinted at him. A new bidder. Captain Rourke, is it? What's your offer? Daniel's voice was steady. 15,000 credits. A murmur ran through the crowd. The current high bidder, a sharp-faced alien with gray, scaly skin, glared at him. You can't be serious, human. You have no need for her. Daniel's jaw tightened. Neither do you. The scaly alien's thin lips twisted into a snarl, but after a moment of hesitation, he stepped back. The auctioneer grinned. 15,000, going once, going twice, sold. As the crowd began to disperse, Valeth turned her piercing green eyes toward Daniel. She stepped off the platform with deliberate grace and stopped in front of him. Her voice was soft but firm. You've bought me, human. Why? Daniel met her gaze. I didn't like the look of the others. They wouldn't have treated you well. Valeth's expression didn't change. And you will? Daniel shrugged. I have no intention of treating you poorly. In fact, I don't intend to own you at all. You're free to do as you please. Valeth's brow furrowed slightly, as if she were trying to decipher his meaning. She glanced over her shoulder, her eyes seeking out Mira. The child had crept closer, still clutching the edge of the vendor's cart. Valeth's voice dropped to a whisper. You expect nothing in return. Not a thing, Daniel replied. But if you and your child need help, I'm willing to give it. For the first time, Valeth's composure wavered. Her gaze softened, if only for a moment. But then she straightened, the mask of calm returning. We'll see if your kindness lasts, human. Without another word, she walked past him to take Nira's hand. The young girl stared up at Daniel with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Daniel watched them for a moment, then turned toward his ship. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he was certain he had made the right choice. Daniel watched Valith lead Nira up the boarding ramp, her every step deliberate and cautious. The ship's engines hummed in the background, a familiar sound to Daniel, though Valith seemed to flinch slightly at the noise. Nira's small hand clung to her mother's cloak as her wide eyes darted around the dimly lit cargo bay. Daniel tried to offer a reassuring smile. "It's not much, but it's safe." He gestured to the ship's interior. "You can make yourselves comfortable in the passenger quarters." Valith nodded, her expression neutral, but she didn't move. Instead, she placed a protective hand on Nira's shoulder. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. Daniel sighed, leaning against the nearest bulkhead. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe I'm tired of seeing people get used and thrown away. I just thought, you and your daughter deserve better." Valith's emerald eyes studied him for a long moment. Then, without a word, she turned and guided Nira down the corridor toward the quarters. Daniel stayed where he was, arms crossed, until they disappeared around the corner. In the quiet that followed, Daniel found himself questioning his decision. He'd taken in refugees and helped strangers before, but this was different. Valith wasn't a wanderer or a traveler down on her luck. She had deliberately sold herself to save her child. That kind of desperation ran deep, and Daniel knew it wouldn't be easy to earn her trust. Shaking off the thought, he turned toward the cockpit. The ship's AI, a simple but reliable program named Bolt, greeted him with a monotone voice. "All systems functioning normally. Flight path to the medical station has been plotted." "Thanks, Bolt," Daniel replied, sliding into the pilot's seat. As the ship lifted off the planet's surface, he glanced at the control panel, noting the coordinates to the nearest colony with advanced medical facilities. The journey would take a few days, plenty of time to figure out what came next. A few hours into the flight, Daniel decided to check on his passengers. He found them in the small dining area. Nira sat at the table, quietly nibbling on a protein bar, while Valith stood nearby, her back against the wall. When Daniel entered, Valith's eyes flicked to him, sharp and assessing. "How's the food?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Nira didn't respond, but Valith said, "It's adequate." Daniel smirked. "I'll take that as a compliment." He pulled out a chair and sat down across from Nira. "You know, you don't have to be afraid of me," he said gently. "I'm not here to hurt you." Nira's eyes briefly met his, then darted away. Valith folded her arms. "She's not afraid of you," she said. "She's just wary of new faces." "That's fair," Daniel said, leaning back in his chair. "I'd be wary too." He studied Valith for a moment. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" Valith's expression hardened. "I'm not interested in sympathy, human." "It's not sympathy," Daniel replied. "Just trying to understand." Valith turned her gaze away, staring at the wall. "Understanding doesn't change what's happened. It won't fix what we've lost." "No, it won't," Daniel admitted. "But maybe it can help you figure out what comes next." Valith didn't answer, and the silence stretched between them. Finally, Nira spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you helping us?" Daniel looked at the girl, her small, pale face peeking out from under a hood. "Because I can," he said simply, "and because you deserve a chance." Nira's lips pressed into a thin line, and she lowered her head. Valith's gaze softened slightly as she watched her daughter. Then she turned to Daniel. "We'll see if your actions match your words." Daniel nodded. "Fair enough." Rising from his chair, he headed back to the cockpit. The ship's navigation console indicated they were still on course. Daniel leaned back in his seat, staring out at the endless void of space. He had a feeling this journey was going to be more complicated than he'd anticipated, but for now, he focused on the path ahead. The soft hum of the ship's engines was the only sound as the small crew settled into a tense routine. Valith kept a constant watch over Nira, rarely leaving her side. Despite Daniel's attempts to make them feel comfortable, a quiet barrier remained between him and his passengers. Valeth always seemed on edge, and Nira remained quiet, rarely speaking unless prompted. One afternoon, Daniel decided to break the ice. He knocked lightly on the frame of the common room door before stepping inside. Valeth was seated at the table, her back straight, her gaze distant. Nira was drawing on a tablet, her small hands moving carefully over the screen. When Daniel entered, Nira glanced up for only a moment before returning to her sketch. "Mind if I join you?" Daniel asked. Valeth shrugged. "It's your ship." "Yeah, but you're my guest," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Figured I'd see how you're settling in." Valeth raised an eyebrow. "And how would you expect someone like me to settle in under these circumstances?" Daniel leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "I don't expect anything, to be honest. Just thought we could talk." Valeth's expression didn't change, but she didn't stop him. Nira, meanwhile, continued drawing, the tip of the stylus making soft scratching sounds on the tablet. "You're good at that," Daniel said, nodding toward Nira's work. The girl looked up, her large, round eyes studying him briefly. "I like to draw," she said quietly. "Yeah. What are you working on?" She hesitated, then turned the tablet around to show him. The screen displayed a delicate landscape, a grassy field beneath a pink-hued sky. A single tree stood at the center, its branches reaching toward two suns. "That's beautiful," Daniel said, genuinely impressed. "Is that your home world?" Nira's gaze dropped. "It used to be." Valeth shifted slightly in her seat. "It's gone now. Destroyed." "I'm sorry," Daniel said softly. "I can't imagine what that must have been like." Valeth's eyes narrowed. "No, you can't. But pity doesn't help us." "I'm not offering pity," Daniel replied. "I'm just trying to understand." Valeth leaned forward, her tone sharp. "Understand what?" "That we're a displaced people. That we lost everything because of greed and exploitation. That I had to." She stopped herself, glancing at Nira. The girl's head was down, her hands gripping the tablet tightly. Daniel held up a hand. "I get it. You don't have to explain." Valeth took a deep breath, forcing her voice to soften. "I don't expect you to understand, human. But I do appreciate what you've done for Mira." "She's a kid," Daniel said. "She deserves a chance to grow up, to have a future." Valeth's expression flickered with something that might have been gratitude, though she quickly masked it. "We'll see if that future is even possible." They sat in silence for a moment. Nira resumed her drawing, and Daniel simply watched. It wasn't much, but it felt like a step in the right direction. For a few days, their journey had been uneventful. The ship maintained its steady course through the starry void, with nothing but the occasional soft hum of the engines and the faint beeps of navigational instruments to break the silence. Daniel spent most of his time in the cockpit, scanning for any signs of trouble. Valeth and Nira remained in the passenger quarters, still keeping their distance but slowly settling into the routine of life aboard the vessel. One evening, as Daniel leaned back in the pilot's seat, sipping from a steaming cup of instant coffee, the ship's alert system chirped. The sound made him sit up quickly, placing the mug aside. A small red icon blinked on the console screen, accompanied by a readout of an approaching vessel. "Bolt," Daniel said, calling on the ship's eye. "What am I looking at?" The eye's calm voice responded. "An unregistered vessel is closing in on our position. No transponder codes detected. It appears to be following our trajectory." Daniel's fingers tapped rapidly on the console, pulling up more data. The ship's silhouette came into focus, an angular, dark-hulled craft that looked more suited for stealth than trade. He frowned. "Pirates, maybe." Valeth entered the cockpit quietly, her steps barely audible against the metal floor. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice low but steady. "Unfriendly company," Daniel replied, not taking his eyes off the screen. "We've got a ship trailing us, and it doesn't look like it's here to trade stories." Valeth's face hardened. "How close?" Close enough that I don't like it. Daniel turned to her. You recognize the design. Valeth leaned over the console, studying the display. Could be bounty hunters. The ones who auctioned me. She paused, her jaw tightening. They don't let people walk away with valuable property. They'll want me back. Daniel's brows furrowed. You're not property. Her eyes met his, cool and guarded. They don't care what you think. They only care about profit. Daniel gritted his teeth. Well, they can take their profit and shove it. I'm not handing you over. Valeth tilted her head slightly, studying him. You'd risk your life for us. Not the first time I've stuck my neck out for someone, Daniel said with a small grin, trying to lighten the mood. But we're not just going to sit here and let them catch us. Bolt, initiate evasive maneuvers. Let's see if we can shake them. The ship's engines hummed louder as the vessel adjusted its course. Daniel took manual control, guiding the ship into a series of sharp turns and sudden drops, trying to lose the pursuers in the labyrinth of space debris ahead. Valeth stayed in the cockpit, her hands gripping the back of Daniel's seat. They'll have better tracking systems than we do. A straight chase won't be enough. Daniel smirked. Good thing I don't play fair. He flipped a few switches on the console, rerouting power to the aft thrusters and deploying the field of electromagnetic chaff behind them. The cloud of interference scattered their ship's signature across a wide area. Clever, Valeth admitted. It's a start, Daniel replied. But it's not going to last. We need a plan B. Valeth considered for a moment, then said, if it's bounty hunters, they're more interested in me than you. Maybe I can draw them away. Daniel shot her a sharp look. Not happening. You're not going anywhere alone. If it keeps Nira safe. I said no, Daniel interrupted. His voice was firm, but not angry. We do this together. That's the deal. Valeth hesitated, clearly unused to someone else taking charge in her defense. Finally, she gave a small nod. What do you suggest? We find a place to hide and wait them out. Somewhere they can't track us, Daniel said, pulling up a star map. There's a nebula not far from here. The radiation levels will mess with their scanners. We'll go dark until they lose interest. Valeth glanced at the screen, her expression thoughtful. It might work. But you better be ready for a fight if they find us. Daniel grinned. I'm always ready. As the ship veered toward the nebula, Valeth returned to check on Nira, leaving Daniel to focus on the controls. His mind raced with contingency plans, but one thing remained clear. He wasn't going to let anyone take them. Not without a fight. The ship glided into the edges of the nebula, its exterior bathed in the faint, ghostly glow of interstellar gases. Daniel kept his eyes glued to the console as he carefully adjusted the navigation. The cockpit lights dimmed as the ship's systems switched into low-power mode, making it harder for anyone to detect their presence. Valeth sat in the co-pilot's chair, her arms crossed. The tension in her body hadn't eased, but her voice was calm as she said, "Do you think this will actually work?" Daniel glanced at her. "It'll buy us time. And time's all we need right now." Outside, the nebula stretched in every direction, its vibrant hues shifting slowly. It was a beautiful sight, but Daniel didn't have time to admire it. Instead, he focused on the ship's sensors, watching for any sign of their pursuers. "We'll stay here until they lose the trail," he said. "With any luck, they'll think we made a jump and left the sector." Valeth didn't reply immediately. She watched the swirling colors of the nebula through the cockpit window. "You keep taking risks for us. I still don't understand why." "Because someone has to," Daniel said simply. Valeth frowned slightly. "You're human. What do you gain by helping Ixilari and her child?" Daniel leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "What do I gain? Maybe a clear conscience. Maybe the chance to do something good for once. Goodness doesn't get you far in this galaxy," Valeth said, her tone skeptical. "Maybe not," Daniel admitted. "But it's better than standing by and letting bad things happen." Valeth's gaze lingered on him for a moment, then shifted back to the nebula. "You're an odd one, Captain Rourke." Daniel chuckled. "I've been called worse." As the hours passed, the tension slowly began to ease. Mira came to the cockpit, sitting quietly by her mother's side. She held her drawing tablet, adding small details to her latest sketch. Valeth glanced down at her and gently placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. Daniel glanced over at the two of them. "How's she holding up?" Valeth didn't answer immediately. Then she said softly, "She's resilient, but she's been through more than any child should." Daniel nodded. "She's lucky to have you." Valeth's lips tightened, but there was a faint glimmer of gratitude in her expression. The nebula worked as planned, masking their ship's presence. No signs of pursuit appeared on the scanners, and the uneasy silence began to feel more like a lull than a prelude to danger. But as the hours stretched into a full day, a soft ping broke the quiet. Daniel sat upright, checking the console, his brow furrowed. "Trouble?" Valeth asked, her voice sharp. "Not sure yet." He tapped the controls, bringing up the data. "Looks like a faint signal. Could be a distress beacon, or it could be a trap." Valeth leaned forward, her emerald eyes narrowing. "We're not equipped to handle more trouble right now." "I know," Daniel said, "but if someone's really in trouble..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "Maybe I'm overthinking it. We'll sit tight until we know more." Valeth nodded, though she seemed uneasy. "It's a risk. You should." The console suddenly lit up. The signal's strength increased, and it was followed by a brief, garbled transmission. Daniel quickly adjusted the audio. A faint voice broke through, distorted and crackling. "Mayday. Life support failing. Anyone? Please help." Valeth stiffened. "It's a trap," she said. "They're drawing us out." "Maybe," Daniel agreed. "But what if it's not?" Valeth's expression hardened. "You'd risk all of us for a stranger's call." Daniel met her gaze. "Wouldn't you? If it were someone like you and Nira out there, wouldn't you hope someone would take that chance?" Valeth hesitated, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then, reluctantly, she nodded. "Fine. But be careful." "Always," Daniel said, steering the ship toward the source of the signal. As the ship crept closer to the beacon's coordinates, the tension returned. Valeth kept one hand near the blaster at her side, ready for any threat. Daniel's knuckles tightened on the controls. The faint voice continued to call out, weaker with each transmission. Finally, they'd reached the source, a small battered shuttle adrift in the nebula. Its exterior was scorched, and one of its engines dangled uselessly. Daniel brought the ship alongside it, scanning for life signs. "There's someone alive in there," he said. "Barely." Valeth's expression didn't soften. "If this goes wrong." "It won't," Daniel assured her. But even as he said it, he knew it was only the beginning of another dangerous chapter. The small shuttle drifted lifelessly, its hull scorched and broken. Daniel stared at the wreck through the cockpit's viewport, his instincts tugging in two directions. The battered ship's distress signal still whispered faintly over the comm, a weak voice begging for help. But Valeth's warning lingered in his mind. This could easily be a trap. "Are you sure about this?" Valeth asked from her seat. Her emerald eyes were sharp, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the armrest. She clearly wanted to believe in Daniel's optimism, but her years of survival taught her to trust her instincts more than a stranger's cry for help. Daniel nodded, though his own doubts simmered. "I'm not sure about anything," he admitted, "but I can't just leave them out here." Valeth sighed. "If it's a trap, we'll all pay for it." "I know," Daniel said quietly, "but if it's not?" He glanced at her, hoping for some sign of reassurance, but her expression remained cautious. "Bolt, open the comm link to the shuttle." The ship's AB responded, and a garbled voice came through. "Oxygen levels critical. Anyone, please help." "This is Captain Rourke," Daniel said. "We're approaching your position. How many survivors are aboard?" There was a long pause before the voice answered, barely audible. "One. Just me. What's your condition? Bad. Air's almost gone. Daniel looked at Valeth. Doesn't sound like an ambush. Could still be, she muttered. Let's hope it's not, Daniel replied. I'm bringing them aboard. Valeth shook her head but didn't stop him. Just be careful. Daniel maneuvered his ship closer, lining up the docking ports. Once the seals engaged, he made his way to the airlock. Valeth followed, her blaster in hand, ready for anything. When the airlock hissed open, a figure stumbled inside, collapsing to their knees. It was a humanoid alien, their skin pale and almost translucent, with faint blue veins visible beneath the surface. They gasped for breath, clutching at their chest. Easy, Daniel said, kneeling down to help. You're safe now. The alien looked up at him, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and relief. Thank you, they whispered before fainting. Valeth stepped closer, her weapon lowered but still at the ready. Well, any signs of trouble? Just one scared, half-dead alien, Daniel said, lifting the unconscious figure. Looks like they've been through hell. Looks can deceive, Valeth said, following him to the medical bay. Don't let your guard down yet. Daniel placed the alien on the med bed, activating the ship's basic diagnostic systems. The screen displayed a critical oxygen deficiency and multiple minor injuries. Nothing life-threatening, but they were in bad shape. Bolt, monitor their vitals, Daniel said. The AI confirmed, and Daniel turned to Valeth. For now, they're just a refugee. Let's give them a chance to recover. Valeth crossed her arms. I'll keep an eye on them. You keep us on course. Fair enough, Daniel said, heading back to the cockpit. As the ship resumed its journey, the rescued alien remained unconscious. Valeth stayed nearby, her sharp gaze never leaving the medbed. Nira peeked in from the corridor, curiosity flickering in her young eyes. Is that another auxiliary? She asked, her voice hesitant. Valeth shook her head. No, just another traveler caught in a bad situation. Nira stepped closer, her gaze softening as she looked at the alien. They look scared. They are, Valeth said, but your Captain Orc seems to believe in second chances. Is that bad? Nira asked. Valeth paused, her expression thoughtful. Not always, but it's dangerous. For the next few hours, they all watched and waited. The alien's breathing evened out, and their color returned. Finally, they stirred, their eyes opening slowly. You're awake, Valeth said, her voice calm but firm. Who are you? The alien blinked a few times, their voice still weak. My name is Ton. I was a merchant. My ship was attacked. By who? Valeth pressed. I don't know, Ton whispered. Pirates, maybe. They took everything, left me for dead. Valeth exchanged a glance with Nira, then leaned in closer. You're safe for now. But we need to know if you're telling the truth. I swear, Ton said, their voice trembling. I'm no threat. Please, just let me rest. Valeth straightened, her expression still cautious. We'll see. Ton's eyes closed again, exhaustion taking over. Valeth turned to Nira. Go back to your quarters. I'll stay here. Nira hesitated, then nodded. As she left, Valeth stood guard over the med bed, her blaster resting on the nearby counter. She still didn't trust the newcomer, but for now, she would give them a chance, if only because Daniel had done the same for her. The quiet hum of the med bay was interrupted by Ton's soft, shallow breathing. Valeth leaned against the wall, her sharp eyes never straying from the figure on the bed. Nira had long since gone back to her quarters, but Valeth remained on watch. She didn't trust easily, and the alien's story, though plausible, wasn't enough to put her at ease. Ton stirred slightly, their translucent skin catching the pale light of the med bay's overhead panels. Valeth tightened her grip on the blaster at her side. She wasn't looking for trouble, but if it came, she'd be ready. After a while, Ton's eyes flickered open again. They glanced around the room, blinking in confusion. Then their gaze landed on Valeth. Where am I?" Ton whispered, their voice still weak. "You're aboard a transport ship," Valeth replied, her tone calm but firm. "You've been here for several hours. The captain brought you aboard after your distress call." Ton's breathing steadied, and they slowly propped themselves up on one elbow. "You saved me?" they asked cautiously. Valeth shook her head. "Not me. Captain Rourke. He's the one who made the call." Ton looked down, their pale hands fidgeting with the edge of the medbed's blanket. "I didn't think anyone would come," they admitted. "I thought I'd die out there." "Why wouldn't they?" Valeth asked. "Someone heard your signal and responded." Ton glanced up at her. "Not many people help strangers anymore. Especially not a human." Valeth tilted her head slightly. "Maybe you haven't met the right humans." A faint smile tugged at Ton's lips, though it quickly faded. "I'm grateful," they said softly, "but I don't know how to repay him." "Repayment isn't his goal," Valeth replied. "At least I don't think it is. He's different." Ton leaned back, closing their eyes briefly. "Different. Maybe that's a good thing." Just then, the door to the med bay hissed open. Daniel stepped in, a datapad in hand. He looked between Valeth and Ton, noting that the latter was awake. "Good to see you're up," Daniel said, his voice even. "How are you feeling?" Ton sat up a little straighter. "Better. Still weak, but better." Daniel nodded. "Good. We've got some basic rations and supplies. You're welcome to them until we figure out our next step." Ton's expression was a mix of relief and uncertainty. "Thank you. I mean it." "No need to thank me," Daniel said. "Just focus on recovering. We'll get you where you need to go." Valeth watched the exchange silently, her gaze flicking between Daniel and Ton. She could see the genuine care in Daniel's actions, the calm authority in his voice. It was strange to her, seeing the human who wasn't calculating or self-serving. She wasn't used to this kind of kindness, and it still left her feeling uneasy. As Ton settled back onto the med bed, Daniel turned to Valeth. "Could you stay here a bit longer? I need to check on our route." Valeth gave a small nod. "Sure. I'll keep an eye on things." Daniel left, leaving Valeth and Ton in the med bay once more. The alien seemed to relax slightly, their head resting against the pillow. "You're lucky he found you," Valeth said after a moment. Ton opened their eyes again, their voice faint but steady. "You don't trust me, do you?" Valeth met their gaze. "I don't trust anyone. It's kept me alive this long." Ton gave a weak chuckle. "I suppose I can't blame you. But I mean no harm. I'm just trying to survive." Valeth studied them for a long moment before leaning back against the wall. "If you mean that, then you'll be fine here. Just don't give me a reason to doubt you." Ton nodded, their eyes closing once more. Valeth stayed where she was, standing vigil. The med bay fell silent again, save for the steady rhythm of the ship's engines. As the minutes stretched on, Valeth allowed herself a moment to reflect. Perhaps Ton was no threat. Perhaps Daniel's insistence on helping strangers wasn't as reckless as it seemed. For now, at least Valeth decided to follow Daniel's lead. It wasn't trust. She wasn't ready for that. But it was a start.